I've sat on almost every side of the table. When you go to meetings with customers and you're sitting around the table, everybody at that table thinks they're right. Everybody is always right. They're right in their own way.
Because if you don't have that alignment, before that value analysis even comes to fruition, you're going to be dead in the water.
Value analysis is not a standardized process. Every hospital has their own value analysis process. Don't go in selling your product. You're going to lose every time. It has to be about the outcome versus the product.
Even though healthcare is a very big world, it's actually very small. And so whether it's a supplier, whether it's in a supply chain role, whether it's a GPO role, all you have really is your own integrity and your own self.
So, hey, good morning. My name is Anita Zado, and I am one of the managing advisors with MedBridge Advisors. I am happy to be here, sitting here talking with a coworker and a friend of mine, Dena McCormick. We've worked together for a while. So I came to MedBridge. I'm actually a nurse by trade. Spent many years at the patient bedside, mainly as an emergency department nurse. So at the front line, saving lives, fighting fires. And then actually after about, 12 or so years, just needed a transition away from the third shift holiday weekend with a young child. So I decided to go work for Premier, which is a large GPO, never even understanding what a GPO was. So I remember the first year I started working there, almost every month I would come home crying, thinking I made the wrong decision. But it was probably one of the best things that I did to stick through that, and because I've learned so much. The first half of my career at Premier, I actually managed the nursing line of portfolio from a contracting perspective, really tying in the contracts with value analysis and clinical outcomes. And then after that, I actually moved over to their direct sourcing company and worked on the manufacturing side. So we were actually making products for their customers. Spent about 7.5 years doing that, so learned from the manufacturing perspective. And then actually transitioned over to one of the regional GPOs. So I was on the regional side and with a smaller group of customers as their VP of Clinical Services. And learned it firsthand from that level, and then moved over to a supplier, and then led me to MedBridge Advisors. So happy to be here and just talk about a vast array of backgrounds. I've sat on almost every side of the table, and that's what makes it so unique with MedBridge, having Dena and I working together, because I used to think of myself as a unicorn with all of the backgrounds that I had until we started working together. And then, I really haven't had a chance to talk to you, but I wouldn't consider us unicorns anymore together. I think I would label us more as healthcare translators because of being able to sit on every side of the table. And I think that's one of the benefits of working at MedBridge, because I don't know many other advisory companies that have this level of service that we can offer to our customers.
I would agree with that. It's, one of the things that I've learned in my career is just being able to help people navigate through the healthcare system. And one of the things after I left Premier that I did was I also became a board certified patient advocate. And that was probably out of more personal necessity than anything. I had helped a very close family member, actually a couple of them, navigate a very difficult health diagnosis. And I thought I was an expert in healthcare. I was a nurse, I was on the business side. I was in supply chain. I knew physicians, I knew clinicians. And I got frustrated with how to navigate and how to understand the products and the drugs and all of those things that you were helping, your family member make these important life-saving decisions. And so being able to bring that level of additional clarity to the work that we're doing at MedBridge, I think and then with your nursing background, it keeps that patient in the center, which is what we all have to do in healthcare. And I think it's so important because we can offer that clarity and keep everybody, grounded as we're, helping the suppliers and each other, stay accountable to make it, one of the best healthcare systems that we can.
Yeah, I agree, because, still being a nurse, but having to take care of somebody directly in your immediate family, until you've gone through that, you don't really know the impact of what it could be and how you carry that for the rest of your career. But I agree. I mean, from a patient advocacy side, I tell everybody all the time now, is that everybody has to have some type of patient advocate in their life. But that does transition to, like, when you think back as far as a nursing career, when I was doing it, I didn't even realize what a GPO was.
That's right.
I didn't realize what supply chain was or how it impacted. I just remember, oh, you got to change this product today. And, trying to understand, put the pieces together of why are we being asked to do this? And moving over to the GPO side, I think, number one, not only taught me the relationships to build with the members and the customers. And I mean, some of those relationships I've carried throughout my whole career. But being able to bring that to the bedside and understanding patient outcomes, actually tying into supply chain. One of the actually good things I feel like came out of COVID is that it tied supply chain, and it actually put a light on supply chain, and it made everybody realize how important it was. And I think that's why you see a lot of clinicians going into supply chain today, because they realize the value of, sure, we can save $2.50 on a product or as a whole, but to drive that conversion through the rest of the hospital is going to impact the operational workflow and probably even cost you a little bit more money if you're looking directly at just saving money.
You're exactly right. Yeah, I had a little bit of a different experience in that when I graduated from high school, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do yet. And I went to work for a GPO, and I didn't even know what it was. It was a local one where we lived. And I was an administrative assistant, but I was an administrative assistant for the sourcing. So I learned every aspect of that. And then that's really what made me decide that I needed to go into nursing, because I learned that part of healthcare. And I had always thought about being a nurse, but I just, that sealed the deal for me. And so, you didn't think about GPOs, but I had the I guess, luxury of figuring it out very early what they did, because nobody else knew. So when I went into nursing, everybody was like, "What do you mean? What is that?" So it was then a very good translation for me to then go back into it once I had that clinical background. And I probably was one of the first value analysis clinical nurses coming out of that, that time. It was when I'm going to date myself, but you still had implant logs, and you'd bring the big binders, and it was mostly on the PPI side, for physician preference. But it was very, it was one of those very first, times of actually sitting down with the physicians and the clinicians to help understand the need for all of us to work together and figure out not only the best product, but the right cost and the supplier world. So that's something that I will always take with me. It was such a learning experience.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
When you talk about, bringing it all together, you think about, in the supply chain world and in the supplier world as well, I've sat on all sides of the table, and I'll say physical table. When you go to meetings with customers and you're sitting around the table, and thinking back throughout my career and putting myself in the light of every seat at that table, because I have been in almost every role, you quickly realize that everybody at that table thinks they're right. And, I think the one thing that you have to learn through all that is everybody is always right. They're right in their own way. and depending on what their role is as to why they're right. But it's very important to sit there and to listen, to learn to listen, and figure out, especially from a supplier perspective, learning what everybody's goal is, because everybody is going to have a different goal. You know, from the clinician side, it's always going to be about patient care and patient outcomes. You think about supply chain, and they are thinking about savings, and they're thinking about, you know, supply assurance. And then you've got, you know, the suppliers, of course, they're wanting to, you know, bring their product and make a sale.
Share.
Yeah, make some market share. But, you know, the team is on the other side of the supplier. They're expecting you to bring an innovative product next quarter and still save them 20%. So I think, you know, the one thing that we have to keep in mind throughout all of this is understanding everybody's goal, as always tying it back to the patient care.
Totally agree with that. And you said something that really hit me, and it was about relationships. You've got to take that time to build those relationships, because, you know, even though healthcare is a very big world, it's actually very small. And, you know, we've known each other for years. We know so many of the same people. And you've got to spend time, you know, just navigating and nourishing those key relationships that are going to get you where you need to be on all sides and for that ultimate patient care. So whether it's a supplier, whether it's a supply chain role, whether it's a GPO role, you know, all you have really is your own integrity and your own self to put forth. And so you just really got to, in my opinion, you have to do that work and have alignment on all sides of the equation. So it is active listening when you sit down. What is everybody's goal? You know, timing may not be right for everybody. I think that's a big one, is you've got to understand and know your customer. Know that the timing may not be right, and don't try to push something uphill. Maybe you just have to wait it out a little bit until it's the better time for all involved, because you've depending on the product, right? You can't have 4 conversions going on in the same unit.
Unless you want to make everybody mad.
Unless you want to make everybody mad. You can't, you know, you can't just do one right after the other. You have to give people breaks, and, you know, you have to understand their busy times and their busy seasons. And I know coming out of COVID, everybody kind of wants to get out of the, you know, kind of back on track, right? But we've got to be able to understand there's less nurses at the bedside now. There's still staffing issues and financial pressures, and so it's getting all of those things aligned so that we're all aiming towards that same goal. And you got to do your homework to be able to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Because the last thing you want to do is be sitting around the table and have the table flipped up on you.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, you know, talking about you know, everybody, healthcare staying the same. I told somebody last week, I'm like, yeah, in healthcare, the beauty of it is, you know, nobody changes, just the last of your email address changes. So you just have to understand that piece of it.
Yeah. So talk about the table that you know, envisioned in our earlier comments. And you've got the supply chain leader, you've got the physician, you've got the clinician, you've got the supplier sitting there. It's so important for all of those people in the room to understand the goal of the other one, because a physician or a clinician is going to have a different goal than a supply chain person. A supply chain person is going to be different than maybe the value analysis person that is sitting there, then maybe the CFO or the CNO that might be in the room. And then the supplier also, you know, has their goal. And so it goes back to what you were saying about being able to do active listening and understand what everybody's goal is. And at the end of the day, if it's the, you know, it's the supplier that's trying to lead the meeting and get the product in, they have to be able to talk to every single one of those people to resonate with them. And that's what's so important about building those relationships. Because if they're building it just on the supply chain side, the clinical person's going to feel unheard. If they're building it just on the clinical side, the supply chain person's not going to feel like they're being valued. And that's where you have to tie that value in, and that relationship building and doing your homework and being able to understand that your proposition has to answer all of those different things to each of those players within the organization. Because if you don't have that alignment, before that value analysis even comes to fruition, you're going to be dead in the water, and you're not going to be able to move forward, and you're just going to constantly be hitting resistance. And I think you've just really got to be able to know that, and that takes time. And I know so many people want to get right to it. You can't. Like, you've got to go through those steps, every single one of them. Even in account management, which is what I did so much in the GPO world. You were on the sourcing side, I was more on the account management side. They would listen to me if they valued my credibility and they valued the relationship that we had done. I couldn't go right in there and say, hey, look at this product or look at this contract, right?
Yeah.
I had to spend time with them, getting to know them, understanding what their goals were, so that I could really resonate and bring them things that were valuable, and not just open up whatever it was of the day, right? And try to sell that or try to position that. So you just have to be able to understand that. And a lot of people say that's basic selling, but I think so many people forget that step. They want to move right to, here's my product, here's the value, instead of understanding the landscape of everybody involved. Yeah. Because it is complex.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had many conversations with suppliers over the years saying, don't go in selling your product.
Right.
Because if you try to sell your product firsthand, you're going to lose every time. It has to be about the outcome versus the product. And one of my coworkers just said that recently at another panel that I read. Don't, talk about the outcomes. Don't try to sell me a product. And
or a problem that they're trying to fix.
Right.
Yes.
Right. What's the solution? Yeah. Yeah. I think timing is a big piece of that as well.
It is.
Because if supply chain, which is usually the ones that are, sending the POs to the suppliers and they're ordering the products, but if supply chain doesn't bring in the clinical perspective beforehand, then I've seen that process fail a lot of times as well. So you definitely have to bring in supply chain with the clinicians all to make the decisions at the same time. It's a struggle because there's a little bit of challenge there that everybody wants to do their own thing. So I think at the foundation level, the supply chain's got to have a really strong process in order to be successful. Especially when you tie in value analysis to that, because it is, and I've talked for years, because value analysis is not a standardized process. Every hospital has their own value analysis process, whether it be a very mature process or not a process at all. I think, but from a supplier's perspective, you have to know that with your customer, and that's where the relationship piece comes in, because if you build that relationship, you will get to know that customer and what their process is. So, it's almost like in each role, you have to be kind of a marriage counselor. You have to listen to everybody. You have to, tell your story, but you also have to be open enough to be willing to sit back and hear no every now and then. Eventually, it will become a yes, but you have to jump through some hoops in order to get that done.
Yeah, and on the supply chain side, you have to understand that a lot of them are not clinical. They're more financial or business. And so you have to be able to tell them that clinical story in a way that resonates to them, and that they feel comfortable with that as well. That's also true when you're dealing with the GPO account reps out in the field. some of them may be clinical like we were, but some of them are not. And so you have to meet people at the level that they are to get them comfortable with what you're saying and your solution and your story, so that they can then resonate with that. I remember that when I was leading teams as a GPO field rep person, I was the VP. My team hated pharmacy because they couldn't understand it.
Don't understand
They
it.
couldn't. They couldn't pronounce the words. They couldn't the drugs. And I really had to spend a lot of time with them to get them to be comfortable with the words that they were saying, because they did not want to look foolish in front of their customer. Totally get it, but I had to push them to learn some of that vernacular and the words that they might use. And I had to get them comfortable with saying, it's okay if you don't know. Just say, I'll go back and find that out for you. So you don't have to have all the answers either. I think it's better when you don't have the answer sometimes, but you're hearing a question or a concern. And then that gives you a chance to follow back up with that customer. And so that's, I think, something too that we have to be comfortable with, because we all want to be able to say we know it all and go in there and be able to deal with every solution or every issue that might come up. But that's one thing I've learned, is that we have to be able to just say it's okay to not know.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah.